Thank you all for coming out tonight. As I was getting ready to do this, I realized that I hadn't actually been up on stage in front of this many people since I played Lady Macbeth for about 300 high school students. And I said, there's a really misunderstood female character. And you think I'm kidding, but I'm not about that. My name is Melody Brooks, and I want to welcome you all here on behalf of the League of Professional Theater Women, the New Perspectives Theater Company, and the Women's Project. I also want to thank Julie Crosby and the Women's Project for housing the event tonight. And for the staffs of both of our organizations who've really made it all happen. Tell you what's on their minds. I just want to take a moment to explain briefly how we arrived at this event and what we hope to accomplish. In early July, I called Susan Jonas, who is here in the black dress, because I had read an article in the New York Times, and I'm guessing a lot of you read it too, which seemed to indicate some very startling facts about female representation, female playwrights, female directors. And I knew from our work years back with the report on the status of women in theater that Susan co-authored with Suzanne Bennett, that it didn't really seem to add up. So we had done a couple panels back then, and I knew if anybody could dispel the misperceptions and sort of put a stop to some of the sound bites that were coming out from the Times article, that it would be Susan. So I called her and I said, we want to do this again, let's put together another panel. And she had a better idea. Not that she didn't want to put together a panel, but in terms of what we wanted to focus on. She said, we know there's a problem. We've known it for a long time. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Yes, so you heard someone say that. Now, that wasn't the exact language that she used. I couldn't in polite company. So, what I had envisioned as a small gathering in our little 40-seat theater, actually not theater, studio, on 37th Street, has grown into this. And I think the fact that this is the last Tuesday in August, and more than 200 people responded to our invitation, not all have showed up, but quite a number, we're very close to that. The time when typically most mortals flee the city and don't come back or resurface till after Labor Day, you guys are here. So I think that there's something to be said for the need for action. And the fact that there is a problem was amply proven in the 2002 report. And tonight we want to move beyond the data and encourage all of you to take part in the process of setting some goals, but we really do want to revisit some of that information. So Susan Jonas is going to be reviewing what was learned from her report and other studies. She's going to talk a little bit about why we need more consistent research and provide the framework for the rest of the discussion from the panels. Julie Crosby, who's on the end, and Elizabeth Van Dyke, who's sitting next to her, will speak from a producing point of view, not just about the difficulties, which many, many, many people in this room know all about, and it's not unique to women, but through their experience, what are some things that might make a difference. Linda Weiner, who's here, is going to talk about, yes, please, anytime you want to applaud for anyone on the stage. She's going to talk to us about the role of criticism and critics and why it matters. That, I think you're the only one, right? The only first string critic in this area?
I was until very recently.
Okay, so now you have someone else here.
Yeah.
Still, she's going to tell you why it matters that there are more. Two doesn't really change the equation. Alexis Green, who's sitting next to Elizabeth, she's going to talk about publishing. Where are the plays by women? Why aren't they available? And how can we do something about that? Lily Behringer, who's right next to me, is going to tell us about the important role that women have played throughout theater history. Most of us don't know it. It's not taught. And she's going to talk about what we lose by not having access to our heritage, why this all matters rolled into one. And then last but certainly not least, Natasha Griffith, who's sitting right in the center. We're really glad to have her because she's not a theater person. And one of the things that we're essentially an employment and social and cultural question, and beyond just the notion of theater, but how does it play out in the rest of the world, and what have been successful practices to close the gender gap in other fields. So that's really exciting that we have, a policy legislative person here to talk to us about that. So we're going to try to keep it short up here. Each panelist, like 5 to 7 minutes, except for Susan. She gets to go longer because she's really the reason we're all here tonight. And then we're going to take a very short break, so you can refill your glasses, stretch your legs, say hi to the person across the room that you didn't get to meet when they first came in. Come back and take some questions from you. And I am going to ask you to really ask questions that dig deeper to what we're talking about here, as opposed to broadening the issues to everything. We want to really get at things that can create change. And finally, we're going to ask you to break into small groups and start that engine of change right here in this room, in this corner or out there or out in the lobby. One of the panelists will lead you. We've got a few other folks who have agreed to be group leaders. And just brainstorm some goals, some action agenda items, because what we really want to do is create a 10-year plan that is going to be launched next year in 2010, culminating in 2020, which will be the centennial of American women gaining the right to vote. And let's see how close we can get to 50-50 and what it's going to take to achieve it. And going back to my earlier reference, as Lady Macbeth would put it, I want to generate a list tonight that we can all point to and say, thus thou must do if thou have it. And with that, I turn it over to Susan Jones.
Hi. It is an untenable situation which should not be allowed to continue, particularly with the support of public funds. It is our hope that the leaders themselves will realize that an affirmative action program is vital to the health of the theater and its audiences. Discrimination not only damages lives and careers, but it debilitates the creative aspect of the theater itself. This is from Action for Women in Theater, a report on employment discrimination against women playwrights and directors, written in 1976. Here we are again. Here we still are. I have at home a big fat file of over 30 years of reports on the status of women in theater, many commissioned by the Women's Project. Because the reports use different methodologies, it's difficult to track progress with exactitude. But all these reports have two important things in common. The first is that they concretely demonstrate discrimination against women in theater. The second is that they were all written with the expectation that by demonstrating the discrimination against women, the attitudes and the behavior of people in the field would change. More on that later. In 2002, Suzanne Bennett and I co-wrote the report on the status of women in theater.
Hi.
Okay, that's okay. Based on a 3-year national study involving hundreds of practitioners, researchers, theorists, and scholars. This was under the aegis of the New York State Council on the Arts Theater Program, represented tonight by Robin Zuckerman. Our report was very detailed, but it was no exception to its predecessors. We were again not surprised to find that women were underrepresented. What we were surprised to find is how underrepresented they were. Dazzled by the high-profile successes of Wit, How I Learned to Drive, Art, Julie Taymor, Gary Hines, and Susan Stroman, we were all persuaded that there had been more substantial progress, but the absolute numbers had not changed. That's why we need to track statistics regularly and with consistent methodology to measure actual progress against perception and against specific goals. In over 3 decades, the percentage of women writers represented on nonprofit main stages had risen from 7% to 17%, and for women directors from 6% to 16%. On Broadway, the ratio for women directors rose from 7% in 1965 to 12.5% in 2007. In between, there were years that the ratio was 2% or 0. I don't have a comparative figure for I don't have a comparative figure, but in 2007, the ratio for plays written by women produced on Broadway was 4% in 2007. If you include participation in creative teams, then it soars to 8%. At that glacial rate, it would take at least a century to approach parity, and that's too long to wait. The 2002 report also showed that the presence of women directors and playwrights was inversely proportionate to the resources, which means that the theaters with the highest budgets, whether they were run by women or by men, hired the fewest women directors and playwrights, with rare exception. And that's still true. It's important to note that there are still very few women running the top tier of financially of theater, so they really can't be considered the gatekeepers. The hiring of women directors and playwrights increased at mid-sized institutions, and it was greatest at the smallest institutions with the least resources. And that's still true. The presence of women artistic directors was also highest at the lowest tier, not of quality, but of resources. And that's still true. Historically, when women become frustrated by a lack of access, they start their own companies, creating opportunities for themselves and for other women. But the downside is, because they operate mostly outside of the mainstream, they have little chance to actually change the mainstream. The other downside is that most of those theaters, those small theaters, if they survive, remain for a variety of reasons that have nothing to do with quality, undercapitalized, understaffed, and underfunded. The point is, the presence and employment of women playwrights and directors is primarily attributable to the initiative of women producers. It has always been women who have championed women, with a little help from our male friends. And if you take a quick look around the room, you'll get a sense of what the rough ratio might be. Women championed women's legal rights, as well as their right to express themselves in public, both in politics and in theater, which are historically linked. In fact, women in theater were among the most influential activists in the pursuit of suffrage, here and in England. Men have historically considered the greatest feminine virtues to be silence and absence from the public sphere. And that remains disastrously true today in a lot of other cultures. Meanwhile, women have fought to be seen and heard through theater. After all, the first known dramatist since antiquity was a woman, Roswitha de Gandersheim, a German canoness whose name means strong voice. The ways in which women have advocated for women and have created presence are represented by our panelists. They've produced plays by women, diverse women. They've published contemporary and classic plays by women, making it suddenly possible to teach the 11th century long canon of neglected works to the next generation of theater artists. They've brought plays by women to the attention of a wide readership through reviews. They've taught the real history of women in theater, how women have shaped the American theater as we know it. And they've restored that legacy through biography, studies, textbooks, and oral history. It's a real joy to see my students, some of whom are here tonight, have that aha moment when they say, Elizabeth Inchwald? I've never heard of her. Margaret Webster, Cicely Hamilton? Why haven't I heard of these women? Why can't I find their plays? Why doesn't anyone produce them? And then many of them go on to use the material for their auditions and then to produce the work themselves. Unfortunately, my aha moment came a decade after getting my doctorate, and in response to the first 100 years of the female playwright. Each anthology, biography, production, televised interview has exponential impact on changing the expectation we have of women theater artists and the expectation that we have of ourselves. We can't stand on the shoulders of giants unless we know who they are. Lately, we've had a spate of demoralizing headlines suggesting that women are to blame for their own underrepresentation. Two rationales have been reported or misreported based on an undergraduate thesis by an economics student from my alma mater, Princeton. The first claim is that women discriminate against women. But to be fair to the student and the thesis, nowhere in this undergraduate thesis is this actually asserted. In fact, the author, Emily Sands, who wrote the undergraduate thesis, believes she has proven that men and women evaluate merit according to gender equality, according to gender equally and without bias. And here's where the confusion came. When the student asked in a survey if the work would be supported by the theater community, women, more often than men, predicted that the plays written by women would receive less support. Sands speculated, and that's all that it is, that women would be more sensitive to the barriers women playwrights would face than men would be. And while this is conjecture, it is not an unreasonable assumption. The second rationale is more troubling because while the research itself is not credible, it's being widely circulated as fact. Sands asserted that the reason women were underrepresented in production was because the pool of available material was too small. When asked, she confirmed that she believed women don't write enough good plays. But her formula, if you actually read the thesis for devising this, is based on unreliable data, speculation, and by Sands' own admission, a lack of knowledge about theater practice. As a number of analysts have demonstrated, there is actually no factual evidence for this conclusion. The fact is that actual submission rates for women at relevant theaters like Playwrights Horizons and Scroball, which have actual data, is between 30 and 40%. This is far less of a disparity than was guesstimated. But moreover, those of us who work in the theater know that plays are almost never selected through submission, so the rationale has little bearing. It's scary how eagerly it is reported that women discriminate against women, or they just don't write enough. Sometimes the truth is just not sexy enough to be the news. Again, all of this points to the need for credible research, conducted reliably and consistently, but also reported reliably. The bottom line is the underrepresentation of women in theater is caused neither by the discrimination of women against women, nor by the paucity of material. Never before has there been a greater abundance of recognized talent among women playwrights and directors. In the mechanisms that confer merit, such as New Dramatists, NIFA's Performance Awards, the Drama League's directing programs, the NEATCG Playwrights Accredited Residencies, and Yale School of Drama's MFA in Playwriting and Directing, just to name a few, women constitute half or more, often well more. 10 years ago, the Dramatists Guild membership was 22% female. That's the full membership. But the associate membership was 44% female. That means that 22% were produced. The larger figure were women who were writing and not getting produced. Today's figures for SSDC are that the associate membership is 44.4%, exactly the same figure as it was 10 years ago. But the full membership is 29.2. That means that women are writing almost at, are directing almost at parity, but are only getting contracts for significant productions at a rate of less than a third. For what it's worth, women have for some time constituted roughly half of the MFAs in playwriting and directing for most of the elite programs. For men, that's a high predictor of career success. For women, not so much. Women are not underrepresented because the talent pool is too small. Yet when theaters were asked to commit to programming equitably, even for a limited amount of time, they balked. They said it would be censorship, imposed quotas, it would diminish the quality of theater. It was too challenging for artistic directors to find 1.5 to 2.5 plays that they thought were worth producing each year, even with the entire global female talent pool to choose from. Now, if they can't find 1.5 to 2.5 plays a year by women as good as what's out there now, I will send them a list. The thing is, the scholar Virginia Valian demonstrated in her exhaustive study of studies of gender perception and career advancement, Why So Slow, which I very much recommend. The only way to achieve equity is to make it a conscious, explicit goal. And if theaters are not willing to make parity a conscious, explicit goal, then we will have to. Then why bother with all this research? What's the point? In every occupation, we have to track employment by gender, race, age, and compensation, regularly and in a consistent manner. And we don't do that at this time. We need to understand the demographics of the profession. We need to measure actual progress against perception, and we need to monitor our progress against a specific goal. We need research. However, we can't keep expecting that raising awareness will change behavior. It hasn't, and it won't. Neither civil nor human rights are secured by polite request. For decades, the English suffragists have tried to win the vote by demonstrating to men that women were civilized, rational, patient, and well-behaved. In other words, no threat. Then a more radical subset, the suffragettes, got fed up. They defied the social prohibition against public appearance. They abandoned their homes and housework and staged spectacular demonstrations, broke windows, set fires, interrupted Parliament, and within a few years they got the vote. I am not encouraging the destruction of property, necessarily, but I am saying that we owe it to them and to all other activists who fought to secure our hard-won rights that we can now take for granted, to finish the job. One such activist is here tonight to help us see our work in a broader social context, to expand our discussion, and to recognize more effective strategies to achieve our goal. Why does any of this matter? First of all, women who work in the theater are entitled to the same protection under the law as women in any other occupation. And if we don't enforce the law, we lose the protection. Second, Carolyn Heilbrunn said, power consists largely in choosing whose stories will be told. If theater matters, then it matters whose stories are told and by whom. Almost all our theaters say their mission is to produce great plays, or great American plays, or great classics, or great African American plays. They don't say great plays by men, and yet that is what they mostly produce, making invisible half the population. Third, every season that underrepresents women sends the message that women have nothing to say, that they don't matter, and that hurts everyone. Not the least of which is the hundreds of thousands of kids bused dutifully to the theater by well-intentioned schools. Finally, the fate of all women is inseparable. In this past Sunday's New York Times Magazine special issue, Saving the World's Women, authors Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Lee Dunn said the paramount moral challenge of this century is the brutality inflicted on so many women and girls around the globe. And what followed was a catalog of unspeakable violence towards women in developing countries. Clearly, for millions, it's tragic to be female, as the Pulitzer Prize-winning women so eloquently showed us. Our grievances here are not comparable. They are, however, on the same continuum. Here we value a white woman as worth 78 cents on the male dollar, 67 cents if she's African American, 56 cents if she's Hispanic. In other countries, women are actually property and accorded no human percentage at all. If we want to create a universal standard for women's rights, we have to make sure that on all fronts, in all countries, in all ways, women are fully human, which is to say 100% equal to men. You can't be a little bit equal any more than you can be a little bit pregnant. Again, from the 1976 report, parity for women would mean 50% of all jobs, since women are not a minority in the population. And this should be the goal of all affirmative action programs in every segment of society. We can achieve this parity through the creation of an extensive alliance with leverage, clearly articulated goals, and the readiness to impose relentless pressure and consequences. Tonight is the first step in developing the strategies necessary to achieve our objective. 50-50 by 2020, by the button.
Thank you, Susan. And I think that gets us off to a rousing start. And Julie and Elizabeth are now going to talk about their role as producers. Both of them are producers of plays by women, so they don't get castigated in the same way as some folks Susan was referencing in her remarks. But please, Julie, I think we're going to start with you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's great to see the Julia Miles filled. I've been asked to speak about the realities surrounding producing theater, particularly in New York. And to that end, I have some great news, which is that Women's Project has a really great season coming up. And since it's my house, I get to do the plug. I have a season brochure out in the lobby. It's hot off the press, just kind of, it's gorgeous and really sexy. And here's the thing about this. So you're going to all check it out, and I trust trust you're all going to be back, and I'm going to circle back to that a little later in mine as well. Here's the great thing. We're increasing main stage production this year, which is a really big deal in light of the economic tsunami that we've all been dealing with. So I want to say that there is support out there for the work of women, and it's here at Women's Project, certainly other places as well, but it's there. And when we increased our main stage production, I'm very happy to report, Seth, that there's no scarcity of extraordinary plays by women from which to choose to increase your production if you want to produce plays. So how did we come about choosing our season at Women's Project? During the 2008-2009 season, Women's Project received 324 scripts and synopses from writers who are not currently in our lab. We have a very vibrant lab program for playwrights and directors and producers. It goes back, it's one of the oldest programs in the country for women. And those plays are not counted in our unsolicited pool. So we had 324 scripts and synopses submitted in addition to our lab, those that our lab members are submitting. In addition, my sort of right and left arm and leg, I guess, Megan Carter, who's down here waving, and Allison Prouty and I attended 500 productions in or readings in New York, written or directed by women. And from those, we cull our season. So it's labs, it's 324 plays, it's 500 readings, and that's a lot. So I just want to say that, particularly since most of our new plays are developed out of our lab. So we have a program where we make artists, we make Women's Project a home for our artists in our lab. So how do you get produced? I don't have the magic bullet, but what I know after 25 years in this business is that this business requires you, in order to get a job, whether it's as a playwright or a director, a producer, a designer, or an intern at Women's Project, it requires you to have connections. And it is all about connections. And this is a business absolutely riveted to connections. And that's true Broadway, where I have spent many, many years, and off-Broadway and internationally. And it's true commercially, it's true in terms of nonprofit, it's true in terms of provincial theaters or regional theaters, depending on how you like to look at them. And it's just true across the board. And what I'd like to say, in light of some of Susan's remarks, is in short, listing your play on Dewey or sending me a synopsis is not going to get your play produced. So let's be really upfront about the fact that connections matter. And that's what this business is built on. So the question becomes, how do you get connections? And I thought I should talk about that, because that seems a little more proactive than just saying, gee, go out and get connected. So, and I'm sure you can all do that, especially if you've had a glass of wine, as I have. Here's what I would recommend. The first way is networking, and there are formal networking resources for you all, and one is the League of Professional Theater Women, which if you're unfamiliar with, I strongly urge you to become more aware of. Your alumni association certainly has a networking group that may not be specifically theater focused, but there's likely to be one that is culturally or entertainment focused. There are conferences, and a lot of conferences, because we just cut our entire budget out of conferences. So because we decided it was more important to put money to art than attending conferences. But there are a lot of conferences out there, and they're great networking opportunities if you can afford them. There are less formal resources. There's the bar at Angus McIndoe. Do you all know what the bar is? Don't go. You can pretty much meet every producer there, particularly on the preview nights when things aren't going well on Broadway. You can go to St. Malachy's for a church service here and there. You can go on Facebook. You all know how to network, and it's really important. the far more important thing to me, and the thing that I see lacking, and this is particularly true with the commercial realm, where I see, I'll say it, I see women more hesitant, is about the importance of mentorship. And I'm very fortunate because I have had amazing, amazing mentors in my life, and frankly, they've mostly been men. And I've had a backlog of support where I needed it most. And that is so pivotal to success in this business. And what I'd love to say here is if you're early in your career, then find someone to mentor you, and you have to ask for it. No one is going to pluck you and say, I'd like to mentor you. It's really about asking for that, and it's building a cabinet of people who will tell you the truth when you don't want to hear it. And that's really important because you can get really myopic in this business so swiftly. And it's also about finding mentors who aren't afraid to share their connections and their knowledge with you. And I think there are many, many people out there who are profoundly generous. And if you're more established, the other thing you can do if you're early in your career is Women's Project Lab, Cherry Lane Mentorship Program. There are established programs out there that once you're beyond graduate school, which seems to be the route, that really are profoundly supportive of young artists and producers coming into this business. If you're established in your career, then I trust you all have someone to mentor. And if you don't, you need to adopt someone tomorrow. And I really do believe that that's something that every single person in this room who has a few years in this business can do very swiftly to change the current the gender inequity tide. Give people a leg up who are a generation behind you. It's not about helping them rewrite their play or telling them how to direct. It's not about career-specific knowledge. It's telling them helping them learn how to navigate this business, which is completely connection-driven. And it's helping give them connections they would not otherwise get without you. I know, they're like yell at my staff every time they're political, but George Bush would never allow us to say this, but giving away information does not diminish power. Giving away information does not diminish power. And I think that's really important for mentors to remember. So, yay, mentors. And finally, I want to encourage you all to make connections by attending the theater. And it sounds really obvious, but I have to tell you, I get really grumpy as an artistic director when I have agents and artists pitch me projects and they have never been to my theater. They haven't seen the work, they don't know my aesthetic, and in any other industry, those people would never get the meaning. And yet I have people come in who have never seen a play at Women's Project who expect that because they've written a play, it must be, if they're female, they must be ready to be produced here at Women's Project. Know the aesthetic, do your homework, go meet the people working at the theaters where you want to be, where you want to work, where you want to direct, where you want to be produced. Go learn their work, go learn the aesthetic, go learn the vibe. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that most theaters have a very male power structure. And I urge you to understand it in order to change it. But you need to get in there in order to do that. And you have to kind of understand what's going on and what the aesthetic is. And I'm not saying write to the aesthetic or direct to the aesthetic, but know at least if you're presenting really something different and experimental, that's not what they normally do, and tell them why they ought to be doing it. At least you're addressing what they already think their audience wants. Because I do think the audience is far more agile and brilliant than we give them credit for being on a regular basis. And finally, I get grumpy when I hear complaints, and this has no gender divide, when I hear complaints about people that they don't see enough diversity on the stage, and that comes from gender, that comes from racial diversity. and yet they're not supporting the work in the theaters that are producing them. And I find that very problematic, because if you're not, if you feel that women and minorities and people of color and people of different backgrounds from you need to be represented on the stage, and you're not actually going to the theater and supporting the work, then you're part of the problem. So my encouragement would be that you go to the theater and see the work that you actually think are being produced, and that's where you put your money. Because money speaks in this country, and that's how things get ahead, is where the money goes. And I guarantee in the commercial world, because I've done a lot of them, they go where the money goes. And if they think that everybody wants to see something written by an all-white male cast, or all-white male man team, then that's what they're going to keep producing, because that's what sells, and that's what makes money. So get your money where your mouth is. Nothing would make me happier than to see the mission of Women's Project rendered obsolete. Nothing would make me happier. But Women's Project was founded 32 years ago, and here we are, and really, on the whole, things are a lot better. And so I urge you to act on your belief in the power, range, and substance of women in the theater. I urge you to demand that their stories get told on every stage in this country. And because the more you demand it, regardless of your position as artist, audience member, and happy person who walked in the door and got a seat, the greater the supply will become, not only at Women's Project, but far beyond. And we can address this. We just need to demand that it be addressed. That's it.
Before Elizabeth starts, who actually preempted you because she put her going to the river flyers out on the chairs.
She said I could.
No, I know. But that's those of you who see that's Elizabeth's project. But I just wanted to point out the whole mentorship idea, that it's what Julie said is really important about demanding it and asking for it, because I think it's something that women don't expect in the same way that men do it. Men get it. They've been given it for centuries. They have no problem taking it. And so we have to kind of accept that we can have it too. So I just wanted to slip that in there before Elizabeth talks to you about her work.
I took some notes so I wouldn't ramble, so just bear with me. I would like to thank Melanie Brooks and New Perspective Theater Company, Julie Crosby and the Women's Project, the League of Professional Theater Women, and Susan Jonas for inviting me to be on this panel. It is gratifying that there is interest in my perspective. Let me begin by saying that I choose to walk in the world by defining myself as a Black woman, an African American woman, who is a Black artist in America. I cannot separate my gender from my race. I choose not to do so. One, because the color of my skin is evident and goes with me wherever I go. Two, the discrimination and inequality I have endured in America, and most specifically in the American theater, is because of my race and gender. And most importantly, my entire aesthetic is based on the African continuum. My people came from Africa to this new world on slave ships. And it is that African culture, that rhythm, texture, that remain in my very ethos. And this informs my art. As a Black woman artist in the American theater, I battle daily to do the work, to have my vision realized, to have my voice heard, unaltered, undiluted, and not compromised. I battle to do work with no funding, or so little funding that it is a miracle that anything gets done. I battle to make a living wage. I battle misinterpretations of my culture that foster and perpetuate stereotypes. I battle the lack of attention given to the work in a system that would seemingly want to ignore me out of existence. In 1999, 10 years ago, the late Kurt Dempster, founder and artistic director of the Ensemble Studio Theater, and I met for the purpose of creating some kind of program specifically for Black women writers. Out of that meeting, Going to the River was born, a program still at EST, a program that was initiated to provide a New York forum in which to develop, nurture, and refine the work of African-American female playwrights. As a Black artist, I had experienced a dearth of multi-level, dimensional, and complex roles for African-American actresses, a dearth of stories about and from a Black woman's point of view. And since then, with the help of Going to the River's executive producer, Jamie Richards, and joined by the current artistic director, Billy Carden, and executive director, Paul Alexander Sleep, we remain committed to getting this work out there. We had so little funding that we could only do readings, have panel discussions, host guest speakers, and celebrate playwrights who had been building a body of work but were and remain underproduced. For example, the late Marty Evans Charles, who in 25 years had only 2 plays produced in New York City. Aisha Rockman, P.J. Gibson, Cassandra Medley. These readings served a purpose and helped to develop the voices of Fannie Green, Kathleen McGee Anderson, Sherry Shepherd Massat, Lorna Littleway, Shay Youngblood, Melissa Maxwell, Elaine Jackson, Perry Gaffney, and the list goes on and on. The irony was, we were asking everyone else to produce the work and not doing it ourselves, using the lack of funding as a reason. This year, I realized that Going to the River was treading water. We were just standing still. What does a playwright want? A production, attention given to the work so that someone sees it and loves it and takes it on a life of its own. I realized that if we are to matter at all, Going to the River must become a producing program. I had to step up and produce. I had to raise funds and do whatever work was necessary to get the plays on stage. This, our first time out as a producing program, we chose to produce short plays in an effort to provide opportunity so many voices could be heard. As a producing artistic director, I chose to take it even further in this age of Obama, in the face of a changing America, and open it up to women of color. Women playwrights of color are horribly underserved, underrepresented, and underproduced in the American theater. Their voices ignored, ostensibly silenced. The river crosses rivers into other cultures. Imagine these women playwrights of color standing before you today, arm in arm, Asian, South Asian, Latino, and African American, and white. See them, hear them. France Luce Benson, Melanie Cooper, Carol Lee Coughlin, Kia Coughlin, Naveen Behar Chundry, Ruby Dee, Nan Ewing, J.E. Franklin, P.J. Gibson, Mira Nalini Kenneth, Desi Marino Pinson, Lynn Knowledge, Bridget Wimberly, and Corey Thomas. They are beautiful. They are mighty. Together, they form an artistic collective that is resounding, that is powerful, and difficult to dismiss or ignore out of existence. Thank you.
So, after that fabulous, can I say, performance, and now, Liz, when are you going to be on stage again, aside from a panel role? I think we'd love to come and see you perform. Linda's going to talk to us about what her job is when she comes and sees plays and writes about them.
When I left America to cover theater in New York in 1980, the most shocking thing was to look down the seats on the aisle in the theaters and realize that they were all men, that all of my colleagues in New York were men. I was a critic in Chicago at the Chicago Tribune for 11 years, completely spoiled and got a totally distorted idea of what parody was in journalism and in criticism. And I believe it was because originally that there was a woman, a critic in Chicago named Claudia Cassidy, who reviewed music and theater and dance and reviewed it every single day and replaced herself every night in the Tribune. And people would buy that paper. When I was growing up, they would buy the paper to read Claudia. They would hate her, they would love her. She discovered Glass Financially. She, in every Tennessee Williams book, he says, if she didn't come and write about it and write about it and write about it until the Broadway producers had to come to Chicago to see this play, she's pretty much forgotten now. If she were a man, there would be theaters named after her. But Claudia was taught Chicago readers that women could have strong voices, and people just saw her out. And after that, there just was a tradition in Chicago of strong women voices. And I was used to it, and I thought that's the way life was. And I moved to New York, and I was stunned. It was pathetic, but I thought, well, this is just some transition period. I'm sure I missed the women, and they'll be here tomorrow, and and that was 1980. And I would go to the Drama Critics Circle meetings, and I was, until very recently, the only first-string theater critic of newspapers and magazines in New York since 1980. Now that is pathetic, right? It shouldn't matter, but it does, and we'll talk about why it matters. But I'm like the mascot there. Like, oh boys, you don't want to really give the award to Will Rogers' Follies. And here's the reasons why, and then of course they would. Anyway, but there are now, I believe, 4 of us in the Drama Critics Circle, and one of them, 2 are actually first-string critics, so there were 5. That's great. And USA Today has Alyssa Gardner, and she's a first-string theater critic. And after Clive Barnes died at the Post, they hired Elizabeth Vincent. I can do this honestly. I know her name. Elizabeth Vincentini, Vincentelli. I'm so sorry. Who started a year ago, and we talk about being a voting bloc now. And it's still, there are times now when I pick up the papers, because I still get 5 papers delivered to my door every morning, and I pick them up and I'd say, okay, what did they say this morning? And every once in a while there would be this real pleasure that it's not just the cheese stands alone. Elizabeth was there, and there actually, someone else saw something that I also saw. Now, it doesn't always mean that we only see things through our gender. That's ridiculous, and I'm not saying that. But I'll tell you that the number of times that I go to plays in New York that are about men, by men, with possibly a female character who's usually the mother of the son, or some very, very outrageous woman who actually could be played by a man. And, that this is actually the characters that are being celebrated in the theater. And I go to plays that are new women's voices and old women's voices, and I pick up the papers and I find out that my colleagues and we're all friends, it's all good. But I pick it up and they say that this play wasn't about anything. Well, yes it was. It was about us. And the fact is that men sitting around talking seems to be a fascinating subject. And women sitting around talking makes them impatient. I don't want to just make like a wild generalization about it. It's just that things don't get better. So, back to Chicago in 1978, after I had been reviewing for longer than I should have been before I realized this, I went to a play in the theater that used to belong to David Mamet's company. It was about to belong to Steppenwolf. And there was this play by a woman named Wendy Wasserstein, and it was called Uncommon Women and Others. And I had never heard of her, and this was not even the off-Broadway one with the famous people. This was a local production. And I remember sitting there and thinking, oh my God, I have never before been in a theater and seen a play in which people, that could be about people I know. That women, that our lives were actually dramatic material. And it was like one of those absolutely, you big dummy moments where I thought, I've been going to theater all this time and never knew it could be about me. It could be about people that I went to college with. Doesn't mean the play was better or worse. It just meant that theater could do something, that there was this whole world of life that was not being expressed on the stage. And I moved to New York in '80, full of joy about all of this. Wendy was writing, and then I would write these stories. I was at USA Today for 1 year too long, and I would write these trend stories about, look at all the women who are writing now, and look at, here's Marsha Norman, and here's Beth Henley, and here's Wendy Wasserstein, and then I write, and here's Beth Henley, and here's Marsha Norman, and here's Wendy Wasserstein, and Marsha Norman. And they would all be saying, we don't want to be thought of as women playwrights. We're playwrights. Don't write these stories that we're women playwrights. Don't put us in a ghetto in these stories because that's going to hurt us. And maybe it did. I don't know, but all I know is that there, as Susan tells you from the statistics, things don't get better for women plays. I can tell you that things don't get better for newspapers. So if you think that somehow I can hire a woman critic, there aren't any critics going to be hired. This is an entirely other panel, except no, newspapers are over. Criticism is pretty much over. And certainly most papers do not want reviews of plays by unknown women in black boxes on 55th Street. If you don't have a star in it, if you're not on Broadway, then it is very, very increasingly hard to get a review in the paper, even if you had all the women in town at all the papers. The web is opening up. There are lots of women writing on the web. The problem with the web is that nobody makes any money. And I think this is a profession, and I think that people ought to be paid for it. And if people are giving it away on the web, why should newspapers even, pay my pension? So there's, how can I tell you, how do you get review? Because I know this is not a bitch session, but a proactive session.
I don't know that that's what we're actually looking
Okay.
for. It's how we want to get reviewed. But really, why criticism matters. I think you're saying it's going to matter less as we go forward. But in terms of shaping the careers of male playwrights, criticism has had a big role in that, and it also has a role in the paychecks that those guys have taken home.
Okay, so write the New York Times and say that there should be some women critics. I mean, really, it's that simple. Well, I don't know how many years you've been doing it. But
Well, I think that this is actually, when we
Yes.
break into the small groups, I would love to see somebody sort of tackle this question, because clearly the internet isn't going anywhere. It's not going away. And people are going to continue to be writing on there. How can we take advantage of an opening there when the opening has never happened at the time, and now the opportunity may be going away entirely. So I think this is a great place to take this, and when we get into the small groups, to see what we want to do with that. So that's okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And now Alexis is going to talk a bit about how we can get more plays out there that are written by women.
Thank you. I'm holding an anthology called Plays by Early American Women, 1775 to 1850. It's edited by the historian Amelia Howe-Kritzer, and it's published by the University of Michigan Press. It contains 8 plays by women, and it is a marvelous tool, a gift for anyone teaching women in American theater in a graduate or undergraduate course. But even more valuable, almost, than those 8 plays in the anthology is the list of U.S. dramatists, all women, and their work, all before 1900, that Amelia collected and somehow managed to convince her publisher to publish. At the back of this book, 75 pages of a bibliography. And I guarantee you that many of these plays were published at the time that they were written. Some of them were self-published. Now you would be lucky to find copies of most of these, and even the most extensive libraries. You probably have to go to collections, these women's papers in various collections, possibly at Radcliffe or Library of Congress, I'm not sure. And I guarantee that most of us sitting here have never heard of most of these women or their plays. So one of the questions I have for you is, have we come a long way? And the answer is no, we've actually regressed. Because if we can't even find copies of plays by women produced during the past 50 years, let alone before 1900, what can we possibly do about that? Where would you go to find plays by Marty Evans Charles, to find Skywriting by Rosalind Drexler, or Gloria Esperanza by Julie Bovasso? Yet these were groundbreaking playwrights in the 1960s and 70s. Okay, why is it important to publish women's plays? To me, that's like a no-brainer. It has been all too easy historically to erase women's work. So it seems to me that it's our duty and must be our passion to get it out there, to publish it. Publishing validates it. It makes it permanent. It gets women's work into the canon. And I don't mean the male so-called universal canon, I mean the women's canon of plays, which we have all been creating for the last 50 or so years since the women's movement of the 70s. After Applause Publishing put out Judith Barlow's edited collection of women's plays from 1900 to 1930, the productions of Sophie Treadwell's Machinale skyrocketed. people had never heard of this play. They hadn't read it. And suddenly it was being produced. It is still being produced, largely because it has been published, and that particular edition continues to be published, and so the play is produced. If you are a contemporary playwright, it is a way for your script to get to artistic directors and producers who do not see the New York production or the McCarter production or the Alliance production. Maybe your play hasn't even been produced yet. Why shouldn't it be published anyway? What is wrong with that? I mean, this is like some sin that we have, created here, that you should not get your play published. Your agent will let you get it published until it's been produced. Well, how else are teachers supposed to teach your plays, or students study your plays, and potentially write about
I
your
said you
plays?
would clap anytime you wanted
If they're not published, how are scholars to understand the body of work created by women during the last 50 years? And it is an enormous body of work, Miss Glass or Sands, whatever, to the contrary, if they can't read the play. Now, having said that, we all know that along with newspapers and perhaps theater critics, the traditional publishing industry, the mainstream traditional publishing industry, is having a lot of trouble these days. And it is barely interested in plays anyway, whether singly or as anthologies, unless the play has received an unusual amount of publicity or awards. They're not going to be interested. Yes, there are niche publishers such as Theater Communications Group and Smith & Krause, but they can't and they don't publish everything. There's no way. And also, that traditional publishing route is a very, very long process. The playwright Shirley Lauro and I recently co-edited a collection of plays by women called Frontlines, political plays by American women. It took us 3 years to get that book out, from the start of having our light bulb idea to the point where it can be sitting in a mound of books at Barnes & Noble or Drama Bookshop. If we had done it online, if we had done it digitally, if we had gone to publishing on demand and published it ourselves, it probably would have taken 3 months. So my question for the breakout session, assuming we have time for those breakout sessions, what I would love for some of you to
Lock the
think about-
doors and pour more
Yeah.
wine.
What are alternative strategies to conventional publishing? Because they are out there. Caridad Savich, who is a wonderful playwright, has a no passport imprint. Not only is she publishing her own work, she's publishing the work of her colleagues. Carolyn Gage has published 47 of her plays on Lulu.com. And unfortunately, terms like vanity press start to creep into our minds. We have to get over that fast, because the internet and digital publishing, these are tools that we should be using. And why not? Why not be entrepreneurs? If we can be entrepreneurs as producers, we can be entrepreneurs as publishers, we can become small press publishers in our own right, for our own voices. So I invite you, I have my computer, I invite you to come and look with me at www.lulu.com, and let's explore some other models.
We can't all go to Alexis's group, or then we won't have enough groups. And with all of that, I think that we really laid out a lot of information, and Millie's going to talk to us about, the history, what we're really not getting. We've heard a little bit of it in bits and pieces, and to put all that together for us. Millie Bear.
Let me say first, the historical record matters to all of us gathered here this evening. Why? because it provides a narrative of how women have shaped our cultural institutions. But when our voices are missing from the historical discourse, then we must raise questions, seek answers, and correct the public record. This has been happening since the early 80s. Because history matters, I want to talk about some of the hills and valleys that shaped the construction of that record for women in theater. Let me begin by saying some very encouraging things about the recent proliferation of research and writing in our efforts to reestablish women to theatrical history. Many forces have changed. Attention has been paid to the role of women in political and cultural events over the last 40 years. For example, the women's movement in the 70s, gay and lesbian coalitions, women moving into top ranks in higher education, and changing research interest away from white European and American males to explorations of new or ignored movements and neglected or devalued artists. The result has been a flurry of writing. Sophie Treadwell has become a cottage industry. Biographies are being written to reintroduce 20th century pioneering women, producers, directors, designers, to the theater world and beyond. And new introductory textbooks give parity to male and female artists. With all due respect, I do not agree that theater historians have erased the contributions of women to theater history. Erased is too active a verb, implying an intentional act. Our chief theater historians until the 80s, all men, in passive acts, devalued or ignored women in their accounts of world history. In a conversation that took place during a meeting in the National Theater Conference at the Players Club in the early 80s, I remember talking to Helen Critchnoy, then professor of drama at Smith College, and naively asking her why she had not written a theater history text. She told me that opposition from the male historians in our field created an uncomfortable barrier in the marketplace for women historians of her generation. Shinoy's strategy to overcome or avoid the opposition was to realign her research and write books that her male colleagues had no interest in writing. Actors on Acting and Directors on Directing, written with her sister-in-law, theatrical agent Toby Cole, are now classics. There's a moral here. Since the late 80s, a huge publishing industry supported by university presses and textbook publishers has addressed the historical record. Today, university presses have created series on women's issues and minority and gender issues as they relate to theater practice. And editors have reached out to women authors to write these books. But here comes the however that exists on the periphery of this evening's discussion. Higher education has been extremely influential in bringing about these reforms with mandates for publishing, available study leaves, and support for publications. But at this very moment, the status of women and men in the academy and their creative output is threatened by the economic recession and mandated retrenchment. As you know or have been reading, university endowments have eroded and public institutions have experienced salary and hiring freezes for this coming year, mandated by state legislatures. We can be certain that these current trends in higher education are having a negative impact on women's careers, their jobs, their writings, and their representation in the marketplace. This project on the status of women comes at a most critical moment. As the economy recovers, we need to look carefully at instances of erosion that have potentially reversed the gains women have made since the 80s. We need, I think, on an annual basis, a contemporary historical record, a TCG-like theater facts to address the trends in job loss, the trends in waning creative opportunities, fluctuations in earnings, and inconvenient truths about the marketplace for theater women in the 21st century. I envision a t-shirt with "History Matters" emblazoned on the front. Thank you.
Segue into Natasha's talking to us now about those kinds of things, job numbers, economics, social policy issues, not in theater, but in other areas, and how change has come about, and what we're happy to hear what she thinks we can be doing in this field too.
Thank you very much. And again, it's a pleasure and honor to share this platform and to discuss this issue. But before I talk about the various paths available to us to travel, I'd like to share with you what I believe to be a critical realization, so to speak. In my travels, having lived in Saudi Arabia, you come back with a different kind of way of looking at life. You look through it maybe through kaleidoscopic colored glasses of some sort, or that's how I like to refer to it. And you realize in order for you to impact change, to have some sort of an impact, you must first face hard truths. Not only about others, but about ourselves. Now, facing the hard truths or realities head on is easier said than done. For the needs of our communities are many and can at times feel like a daunting task. But if not us, who? And if not when? And if not now, when? And whose responsibility is it? We are responsible for each other. For there is only one world, one human race. And so if we were to set aside our artificial barriers of class, economics, ethnicity, education, even gender, you will realize that there are far more things we share in common than we do not. Now, again, speaking the truth can come at a very high price. And I appreciate the candidness I've heard today on this panel. I really, really do, especially being in an area that I'm interested in. Now, I'm not a professional advocate, but there is something in me that tells me I cannot remain silent. I truly believe and consider that the real enemies of women, of people of color, anyone wonder what they are?
Themselves.
I'm certain you know them and the likes of them. We commute with them, shop with them, work, live, and dine with them. They are called many things, but are best known as denial, silence, and apathy. They are called many things, but are rarely seen apart. They exist most everywhere, between races, ethnicities, genders, and even in our houses of worship. And our refusal to recognize perhaps even our own part, our own role in perpetuating what has become gender discrimination or discrimination of any sort. Sometimes we have to point the finger at ourselves. And once we do that, realizing what we have done, we can bring about change. Denial, silence, and apathy, or I'll just refer to as DSA, is the very reason why kids are denied access to swimming pools in 2009. It is the very reason why women are forced into sexual servitude. That we are paid 78 cents, 52 cents actually for Native Americans, and of course Black and Latinos are in between. It is the very reason why women who recently exercised their right to vote in Afghanistan lost their fingers. Denial, silence, and apathy. If you are not motivated to do something about what's happening in the lives of women, even if it's not in your immediate life, then we contribute to the problem. It's not just about men. It's about the human race. It's about the human spirit and what it is we choose to do and or consciously, perhaps, even choose not to do. I think in this past national election, in talking with David Plouffe, you realize that the branding of the possibility of an African American, a Black man, being president was something that not even African Americans were necessarily prepared for. Because we knew that there was a protocol. There were people whom we should have expected to give the green light, so to speak. But they helped us to peel back our personal onion and reveal our own prejudices and how we discriminate. And yes, women can discriminate against women, and Blacks against Blacks, and Latinos against Latinos, and women against women. I look into this audience, and I would have loved to have seen a bit more diversity. Yes, I would have. But we must begin somewhere and sometime, and hence my conclusion on my private comment about the importance of being part of something rather than nothing. Denial, silence, and apathy, the two enemies of humanity. I believe there are 4 paths to effect change. Not basically call them the 4 L's, actually the 3 L's, because one is not relevant, and one is an N. So let me get the one that we're scrapping. L, leave it alone. Lay down and do nothing. Not an option. Just plain old not an option. You don't even have to spend any more energy on it. 3, that was 4. 3, lead by example. You heard today women talking about them seeking their own funding, realizing they needed to produce, utilizing what's available, utilizing the media. There's a lot of media out there. Put it in their faces so often, so much, yes, they get tired of it, but then you'll find someone else. We've struggled, and I'll talk with you a bit about the New York Women's Agenda and our efforts. We've struggled trying to get the media coverage we rightfully deserve on this issue of pay equity. And we learned there were so many women who didn't even realize they were earning only 78 cents. Today, well-educated women, that Native Americans make 52 cents, that Latinas, I think, make 65 cents. We have a unique opportunity with the advancement of technology to share information. We do it all the time. But we need to be able to grasp those things that really matter, that can impact us, not just individuals, not just whites, not just Blacks, not just Asians. We need to be able to pull upon it. If you don't know any, I remember growing up, I know one Black friend, growing up in Joliet, Illinois for a short while. But just, realizing that you have the option, you have a choice, you have the opportunity to go beyond your comfort zone and sharing with people. You'll realize, again, that there are far more things we share in common than we do not. So the sharing of information is very, very important. Share, no, that's lead by example.
Oh, okay.
All in the lead by example. Number 2, hit them where it hurts. Lawsuits.
Susan's been dying to hear someone say that for weeks now.
It's unfortunate, but It's, you know, there are pros and cons to everything. You realize that there are equal opportunity legislation in place. You see them always written on the bottom, especially of government, postings, positions of the like. And private industry is assumed that they practice the same. And at times there can be a backlash. We'll do the bare minimum, but it doesn't necessarily change perception. It was automatically assumed that a person, when you walk in, not from your name, that they're incapable. If they're Black or Latino, Asian, slightly different, perhaps, depending on the field. Depending on the field. So we're talking about having to educate. Again, that goes back to denial, silence, and apathy. It's a diseased mentality, and we have to find the antidote. We have to find what will help to kill that, eradicate that. So lawsuits are always available as an option. But realize it's something that takes significant amounts of time, and you have to be very committed to realizing that change. And that you don't leave it just limited to yourself, that you bring others with you. I'm not talking about a class action type lawsuit, but simply that you bring others to support the issue, the cause. That helps get the word out. And again, go beyond your race and your ethnic possible differences. And then of course, number one, legislation. The creation of coalitions, building our voices to a crescendo, is how I like to refer to it, that is so deafening that the issue cannot be denied, that we will not be silenced, and our action could most certainly not be referred to as being apathetic. I'd like to share with you one example of a coalition. Because I know, it's an election year, and you'll find various organizations will collaborate to have a mayoral candidates forum, and things of that sort. But there are so many different opportunities that are out there that we could work together. Prior to me referring to the Women's Agenda, there was an effort a couple of years ago when I was president of 100 Black Women, New York Coalition 100 Black Women, the founding chapter. And I was approached by a dear colleague of mine for an opportunity to work with a New York State Senator, Jeff Klein, actually. And it was to bring support, bring attention to the elimination of the statute of limitations on rape and sex crimes. We couldn't find organizations that were interested in getting on whatever steps to participate in the public forum or having an issue a press release, or I couldn't understand why, because we were not connected in the way that we should have, or how we would have assumed. So I would hope that opportunities such as that we would do a better job. I don't know if everyone's affiliated with the 3 hosting, sponsoring organizations here, but through New York Women's Agenda, we have a coalition, Equal Pay Coalition NYC. It's a collaboration, it's a consortium of about 30-odd organizations, and we're all coming together for the purpose of addressing the issue of pay inequity. It's in response to growing concern, mounting evidence, and the continuing economic strains that are brought upon women and minorities because we are not paid fairly. The New York Women's Agenda, if I may speak. As I look at this list,
Yeah.
I do not see.
I was just going to say that I think that's actually, unless it's really, I think it's going to fundamentally add to our understanding of what we're just saying, because I think you've done an incredible job of making that clear. And I would like to say in the breakout group, I think most people who are here are affiliated with one of the 3 sponsoring organizations, or all 3. Many of you. Is there anybody here who has nothing to do with any of the 3 organizations? Oh, that's more than
It's a good thing. You ladies
well,
reached out.
yeah.
That's a good thing.
Because what I was going to suggest was that the idea of a coalition and coalition building and how we do that would be fabulous for you to do in this small group.
No problem.
And get folks that want to come and learn about that that this is an immediate action item
And
that
just
we
in
can
discussion.
move out of tonight, and we can form a coalition, and we can hopefully have some volunteers out here, and you can lead the way, because you are so inspired.
Thank you.
I didn't want to cut you off, but we are running
It's
behind,
okay.
and so I want to get a little break, and I'm assuming there's information on your group's agenda.
Yeah, on its agenda.
And the coalition.
We haven't finished.
So I would like, if we could just take 10 minutes, and it's an intermission, and a real 10 minutes as opposed to the extended intermissions that we used to do here, and come right back